his combat knife in one hand and bolt pistol in the other, forcing his eyes to adjust on the barely visible shadow that was his opponent. He hit the assassin's shoulder first, but his opponent was ready, wrapping an arm around Orphos' waist and throwing him over his body to slam back first into the rock. The assassin's camouflage flickered, and Orphos saw him properly for the first time. He was dressed in a complete covering of black synth skin, ribbed and paneled to protect the vital organs. The synth skin covered his scalp, and his face was concealed by a mask, with an opaque eyepiece and breathing grill. His sniper rifle was as long as he was tall, with a pistol in the holster as a backup. Orphos recognized the technology of the synth skin from the Assassinorium factory, but had no time to register anything else, before the assassin's pistol was in his hand. Orphos knocked the gun aside with his knife. The assassin kicked Orphos' own bolt pistol out of his hand. Orphos kicked out into the assassin's midriff, but the assassin was suddenly not there. He moved faster than anything. Orphos had fought before. The cold against the back of his skull was surely the barrel of the assassin's pistol, and he had a split second to live. "Cease fire, brothers!" came Lysander's voice over the vox. "Cease fire!" The pistol did not fire. Orphos did not die. "I have been given my orders," said the assassin, "and so have you." His voice was utterly calm, as if synthesized. He was not even out of breath. "Holster your gun," said Orphos. "I have not been given that order," said the assassin. In the corner of his eye, Orphos could see the Assassinorium soldiers, their lasguns lowered, standing motionless. Their dead lay around their feet. The only sound from battle was now the whirring of Squad Septim's chain blades. "You killed Ketrips," said Orphos. The assassin did not reply. "You shot my brother Scout and me. You were in my way." Orphos thought back to the mountainside, where he last encountered the assassin. The face of Speaker Velsaphoranus before Orphos was blown away. The feel of hot steel slicing through his arm, Grace's blood spraying across his back. Suddenly he began to understand. "You seated Opus with moral threats," said Lysander, "and killed Ketrips when he came here to investigate them. Why?" "Why else does an assassin do anything?" said Lady Cincella. Neither had moved. Each was ready to kill the other. "You have a target on Opus." "Of course we do," Cincella said. "Would the Assassinorium have come here at all, have sacrificed so much for this war if there was no target? Who is it?" "Someone whose existence is prejudicial to the continued survival of the human race," said Cincella. "The worst kind of foe that exists." "The same could be said of every target the Assassinorium hunts down," said Lysander. "I would imagine those exact words are used in Centaurum Imperialis when debating the Assassinorium's use. What makes this different?" "It is enough that we know," said Cincilla. "Then the honor of my chapter is not satisfied," said Lysander. "The duty of the Imperial Guard is to fight and die without ever asking why. But I am a space marine. I am the chosen of the Emperor. I will not see the blood of my brothers shed in darkness. When we risk our lives, we do so on our terms, not yours." "Honor," said Cincilla. Her voice was heavy with scorn. "You are better than that. Are you not, Lysander, for whom no sacrifice is too great? We know what you will do for victory. We know how many have died, and much worse, at your behest for victory." Lysander took a half step forward, with the tension crackling between them. It was a threatening gesture as the cocking of a gun. "You watch your words," he said. "Why?" said Cincilla. "Because of honor?" She shook her head. "The common soldier must believe he is fighting for good versus evil. Perhaps even a space marine must believe this. But you and I, Lysander, know the war we fight is not a matter of wrong or right. It is a clash between two different flavors of immortality. One path has us survive. One path of disorder, chaos, and the predatory Xenos has us die out. Neither is right or wrong. You know this, Lysander, for whom no sacrifice is too great for victory, as well as I, as well as anyone." Lysander looked for an answer, but could find none. She was right. It was not about right or wrong. Lysander had done many things that any right-minded man would call evil, because it was the only way to secure victory. But this is opus, he said finally. This is war. Millions will die. You can do better than that, said Sincella. And even to Lysander his words sounded hollow. Do not fight us, said Sincella. We are both on the side of survival, and nothing else matters. Not right or wrong, not honor, nothing. You would do anything for victory. We must also let us conduct this war as we will. For victory. You summoned the demons of the warp? Retorted Lysander. You made pacts with sorcerers and witches. We broke them, snapped Sincella. The remark had hit a nerve. We tracked them down and shattered their will. We bound them to our service, and when we were done, they will be summoned to our presence and executed. We will have done more to eliminate such threats to the Imperium than any servant of the Emperor could claim, and in doing so will have destroyed a far greater threat. Do not pretend that great men, saviors of the Imperium, have not stepped over that line too. Lysander took a breath. What is your target? He asked. I cannot ask you to burden yourself with that knowledge, said Sincella. Fight as you have done, or leave opus to us. It makes little difference. Do not fight us, and your duty here is done. If there is an enemy of the Imperium here, if it is as serious as you claim, then my duty is to kill it. Do not follow us, Lysander. I will not allow myself to be brought to battle against us again. There must be no more bloodshed between allies, agreed? What is your target? Repeated Lysander. I will not tell you, said Sincella. And mine is one mine from which your librarian Dephobius will be tearing no secrets. Serve on, Lysander, as we shall. Sincella turned her back on Lysander and walked away towards the narrow stone bridge that led to the crash site. On the bridge were two more figures. One was Scout Sergeant Orphos. The other was an assassin, going by his synth-suit skin, and a follower of the Vindicare Temple, going by the sniper rifle he carried, an elaborate weapon with a large suppressor and a scope with multiple ends. Lysander could tell its high craftsmanship even from the other side of the bridge. Orphos was running. The assassin was pursuing him, with his pistol sidearm in his hand, ready to shoot. Sincella seemed prepared for the assassin, but not for Orphos. It's the translator, said Orphos. The Assassinatorium's target. It's Zealous translator. He was shooting at her, but Graeus and I got in the way. Skuld? Demanded Sincella of the assassin. Say the word, mistress, replied the Vindicare. It is too late now, said Sincella. The translator, said Lysander. Lysander had an image in mind of perhaps the least threatening opponent he could imagine. The skinny, miserable woman who crouched at the Lord Speaker's side and translated the language of the Aristia in a low Gothic. She had barely made any impression at all. She could twist the Lord Speaker's words into anything, continued Orphos. She was controlling the Aristia through him. That's who was being moved to the refugee camp, not Velf Sophranus, his translator. She's the target. She's the reason we're here. Orphos took another few steps towards and stopped, having walked the area of psychic anomaly generated by Sincella. Sincella! Demanded Lysander. Is this so? Sincella looked at him. There was no expression in her face now. Her previous interactions had been feigned. The nuances of her facial movement and vocal inflection the result of sleep-taught routines. There was no need to keep up a pretense. She clamped the collar shut around her neck, and the unnatural, hateful waves stopped breaking against Lysander's mind. It is so, she said. Is her name Legistrasse? It matters not what its name is. It does, said Lysander. Because if you are hunting Legistrasse, there is something we know that you do not. Oh, said Sincella. The champions on this world are afraid of her. We have looked inside their minds. They obey her. She has taken control of the same weapons you deployed to bring about this war. That means you face her, you face them. You need not just one bullet, Sincella. You need enough to kill a whole planet's worth of moral threats. You do not have them. We do. Then you will fight alongside us, Lysander, said Sincella. Not as an ally, but as an enemy of your enemy. Not for honor, for victory, for survival. But you must tell us everything, Lady Sincella, for as unaccustomed as you are to it, there must be no more secrets. Lady Sincella held up a hand. Or the Imperial Fist continue to fight, and we will not give up Opus. We will not allow its people to be condemned by the servants of chaos, and we will not forget who brought those servants here. Then it is settled, said Sincella. Though all parties no doubt dislike it, the Imperial Fist and the Officio Assassinorum will fight together to acquire and kill the target Legistrasse. Then what must we do first, said Lysander. First, said Sincella, I must tell you what Legistrasse is. Many stories describe the birth of the Officio Assassinorum. All of them are lies. Some are perpetrated longer than others, and that made them as close to the truth as possible when discussing the Assassinorum. The truth was buried so deep, recorded in so many writings, later obliterated, and memories withered away, that the truth might as well never have existed. The days of the Horus heresy were so dark that their shadows stained the next 10,000 years. The emperor and the commander of his armies, the war master Horus, fought a civil war to determine the future of the Imperium and of the human race. It was in this war and the upheavals that followed it the Imperium, as it currently existed, was founded. The Adeptus Terra took over the government of the human race in the name of the critically wounded mortal emperor. His church arose to enforce its piety. The Imperial Guard and Navy and the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes were reorganized to defend it, and somewhere in the darkness, the Officio Assassinorum was born. Killers were selected by the Emperor, 6 murderers without peer, each so skilled at a particular form of death that their skill was akin to worship. When the heresy ended, with Horus dead and the Emperor crippled, they vowed to pass on their skills to the next generations, who would do murder in the Emperor's name. Or the Emperor's Church, the newly founded Adeptus Ministorum, fought to reconcile the savagery of the Emperor's many deviant cults with the word of the Imperial Creed. These cultists offered up murdered victims as sacrifices to the Emperor. Instead of purging them, the Ministorum brought them into the fold, focusing their bloodlust on the skills needed to hunt down the Emperor's foes, and building 6 mighty temples to house and train them. Eventually, the 6 houses broke from the Adeptus Ministorum, and vanished in the deepest shadows of the Imperium. Or, all of the most deadly killers deployed by the ruinous powers under Horus's leadership, a handful were captured during the heresy. In its aftermath, instead of being killed, the fledgling government of the Imperium offered to indulge their wildest excesses of bloodshed in return for teaching their skills to the Imperium's own killers and founding the 6 temples. None were true, but none was truly a lie, for the truth itself did not exist anymore. 10,000 years passed. The Imperial assassins honed their craft to such an extent that one man or woman could do what they want. To take an army by conventional warfare. Even the High Lords of Terra, whose permission was required by Imperial law before an assassin could be deployed, did not know where the assassin temples were located, or even if there were physical temples at all. The very finest archaeotemples was made available for the temple's Grand Masters to arm and armor their agents. A well-placed bullet or a blade ended thousands upon thousands of lives. Governors sought to secede from the Imperium, the commanders of traitor legions or alien armies, the admirals of pirate fleets, apostate cardinals who preached words abhorrent to the Imperial Creed, heretics whose innovations and tech abominations threatened to destabilize the Adeptus Mechanicus. Whole Imperial armies and fleets were spared when a war was ended before it began, with a key enemy general or spiritual leader executed by the servants of the Assassinorum. There was never any shortage of deserving throats to slit, never any lack of certain misery and death to be averted by a bullet through the correct brain. The Calatus, said Lady Sincilla, who kills through deceit and disguise. She can take on any form, even mimic the pheromones of certain noisome aliens, and thereby get close to the target to place a knife through whatever vital organ is most vulnerable. The back of the gilded pyre was not as luxurious as the inside of the Maestra Morae, to which she was accustomed, but she showed no discomfort strapped to the grab restraints. The Imperial Fists had 2 Thunderhawks on Opus, and the second, the Peril Swift, had been recalled from Rakaba to support the transporting of Lysander's strike force from the Blood Eyrie. The Gilded Pyre was currently for use of Lysander and Lady Sincilla, and Agent Skull taking a seat in the passenger compartment's corner. He said nothing, and Lysander had not seen his face underneath his stealth mask. The second temple is the Averser, the Berserker, a weapon to be pointed at the enemy and unleashed. Even in death, his body chemistry will cause a biological meltdown, destroying whatever has slain it. When the target is known for martial superiority and insistence on fighting its assailants in person, it is the Averser's way of death return. I know, said Lysander of the Averser. Then yours is great fortune, Lysander. For many, the existence of the Averser is the last thing they ever learn. Third is the Venenum Temple, masters of poisons. Theirs is the mantra that every enemy has a weakness, for the alien and the demon are not immune. Xeno's tailored toxins can be synthesized in such small doses that only the venomum can be trusted with their use, lest the last drops be wasted. Psychic poisons, such as those gathered from the Emperor's own tears at the foot of the Golden Throne, may lay down the demon again. Only the venomum can be given the task of delivering. Fourth is the Vindicator. The sniper, said Lysander. I witnessed one on the battlefield. Agent Skull is not the first I have encountered. Quite so, Sincilla said. Masters of death from a distance. A perfect mission is one which the target is slain without anyone ever knowing where the bullet came from. Like the assassination of Inquisitor Ketrips, that was, as you suggest, a perfectly executed mission. The killing of Legendstrasse, said Lysander, was not? The Vindicator, Agent Skull, spoke for the first time. I had calculated for the effect one Space Marine's body impending my shot. He said, I was not prepared for the bullet to pass through 2 bodies. Yet this is unforgivable. The failure was a sin, and shall be repented of when the target is dead. Fifth is the Caluxus Temple, said Sincilla, into which I was inducted, a hunter of psychers. Any witch or sorcerer draws his power from the warp, where that power boils and blazes without containment. Every human mind has its echo in the warp. But the mind of the Caluxus is a negative presence, a physical void, like a black hole. Where we walk, no psycher's art can prevail. Your call that renders you almost normal, then. It does. As a Grand Master of the Caluxus Temple, I must sometimes attend to diplomatic duties, among other adeptae. It would not be prudent to deploy the Caluxus' weapon on such occasions. The sixth temple is the Venus. His purpose is to erase not just the physical being, but the memory, the existence of the target as a social construct, eliminating all who know the target and erasing all data pertaining to him. And what could that target be, said Lysander, that 3 assassins are dispatched to kill her? What else, said Sincilla, but another assassin? The Aristia had not always been noted for their mercy. Opus's rulers were adept at absorbing their enemies into their own ranks, forming new bloodlines from the surrendered kings, and welcoming their princes and counselors into their parliaments. In this way, as much as on the battlefield, Opus was conquered. But sometimes the Aristia of Kazeo had been angered too greatly to show such compassion. The city of Cray had resisted the Aristia for thousands of years. Ancient pacts ensured its independence, and it ruled by its own hinterland, by the sea, with what on Opus passed for peace. The Aristia swapped ambassadors with Cray, which became a city of poets and scholars, or artists and intellectuals. Every member of the Aristia had hung paintings by one of Cray's masters on his wall, or a book written by one of his city's literary elite in his library. But the Aristia, in silence, were jealous. Cray was beautiful, Cray was rich, commoners dreamed of living there. The city's artists were patronized by the planet's most powerful. The hundreds of years the desire was voiced, but as a whisper, in the counting houses and saloons of Kazale. Bring Kree into the fold, conquer it by arms or politics, and take that cultured wealth for ourselves. 100 years before Inquisitor Ketrops landed on Opus, the Aristia sent an envoy to the Percepticon of Kree, carrying with him a delegation. The Kree belonged to the Aristia, and always had done. The signatory to some ancient pact of independence had been revealed, through careful perusal of the records of the Temples of Muses, to be of unequaled bloodline. Kree would allow the Aristia to take over its government and continue as it had done, only with minimal impact on the everyday lives of its people. Kree knew the Aristia were jealous. The city's greatest minds had gathered once every few decades to discuss what would be done when the moment came. Some created elaborate plans for war machines and hidden death traps surrounding the city. Others wanted to mobilize the citizenry, train in them, and arm them to be turned into an army at moment's notice. But none of these plans played to the strengths of the Kree. They were not warriors. Mechanical war machines could only do so much without fighting them. The peasants could not hold out against the Aristia's armies for long, so they attacked with ideas. The envoy was sent back with a reply that Kree did not recognize the legitimacy of Aristia's authority. Writings flooded out of Kree describing how many philosophical reasons why the Aristia could not legitimately rule a planet. Works on the nature of power, on the rights and wrongs of the government, and the possibility of a planet's common citizens to rule themselves, emerged to catch the imagination of academics and commoners worldwide. The Aristia were furious. It would have been one of the things for Kree's soldiers to face the Aristia on the battlefield. Dead commoners were of little concern, and the Aristia's sons needed new wars in which to earn their commendations and glorify their bloodlines. But this was an assault on the very fabric on the Aristia, on the concept of power itself. Kree could not be brought into the fold. Its people could not be trusted to embrace the Aristia as their betters and their rulers. Its elite would plot just as they had done, to find a new path of independence. Kree had to die. Kazale threw everything it had at Kree. It was no longer interested in bringing the city's military to battle and forcing the city to surrender. The city itself was the target. The intellectuals of the universities and galleys were herded onto the street and their brains dashed out against the cobbles. The people were forced at bayonet point from their homes. Works of art were defaced and the libraries burned. When it was done, Kree was empty, save for the bodies. The Aristia forbade anyone to settle there again. The city was left for the forest to swallow, and over the decades the trees broke through its streets and broke apart the foundations of opera houses and museums. It had stood like this, abandoned and decaying for a century, when Operation Starfall began, 200 kilometers to the west of the abandoned city. Karnakal's six-finger wrenched his blade from the body of another Imperial guardsman. The dirt under his feet was sodden with blood. Blood dripped from the leaves of the trees around him, like a red rain. It was the blood of his own soldiers, who in their madness had hammered sections of jagged black metal armor into their bodies. It was the blood of his enemies, guardsmen in desert camouflage, ill-suited for their sudden deployment in the coniferous forest towards the eastern edge of Starfall. Karnakal did not care whose blood it was, for his god did not care either. "Bathe deep!" he yelled. "It will wash away your weakness. Drink deep, it is strength." His soldiers ran through the streets. He saw 2 or 3 of them cut down by lasfire. The enemy, shocked by the force of his charge, were scattered but fighting, trying to organize themselves into firing lines. An Imperial officer, wearing a long black greatcoat with a peaked cap, stood in front of him. Karnakal's height was so great that he looked down at the man as the officer yelled the words of prayer and ran straight towards him. The officer had a power sword, a fine weapon with an elaborate basket hilt, and a blade that was a sliver of silver light. Karnakal sidestepped the first thrust and sliced his chainsword through the back of the officer's leg. The chain teeth, already clotted with a dozen enemies' worth of gore, carved through the man's leg at mid-thigh. The officer sprawled into the wet dirt, and Karnakal picked him up by the neck. The power sword had dropped from the officer's hands. the blade hissing where it touched the mud. Carnical looked in the officer's face. Already the blood had drained from it. It was withering as he watched. A memory surfaced from the bubbling red ocean of Carnicle's mind, half recalled, fragmented by the centuries. A face like this. But not exactly. It was the face of another space marine, as Carnicle himself had once been. "Side with us!" the voice cried. Carnicle could not put a name to it, but he had obliterated that information from his memory. "With us! Angron is mad and Horus desires power! My brother, do not!" Carnicle's hand was around the space marine's throat and his memory, just as it was around the Imperial officer's now. And both hands were closed, crunching through bone and cartilage, both faces contorted in death. Both pairs of eyes rolled up and went dull. Carnicle threw the memory out of his mind, at the same time slamming the officer's body against the tree trunk. It was good. There was blood. The smoldering armor he wore smoked where the blood splattered against it, filling the forest with the stench of burning men. His head pounded with signals from his cranial implants, which dispensed the painkillers that dulled the agony of the molten armor with every life it took. He strode through the forest, lashing left and right with his sword. Men fled before him, as if he were a natural disaster darkening the horizon in front of them. Some stood to fight, and those who tried were gifted to dismemberment with his chain blade, or were grappled and held against Carnicle's molten armor so they burst into flames and were released, screaming and dying, to run at random among their fellow soldiers. Carnicle's own soldiers followed in his wake, leaping on the enemy fallen and tearing them apart. They used the metal blades with which each man had replaced his left and right forearm. They painted themselves in blood and moved on to find the next kill. The painkillers flooded through Carnicle. His full strength unfolded, and he knocked half a dozen men away with him with the great sweep of his blade. Severed heads and limbs rained down. Carnicle roared with the sheer exhilaration, and the great tide of adrenaline pumping through his hearts. A shadow passed overhead. Carnicle looked up to see the irresistant scaled belly of the warp serpent coiling overhead. Hate rose in Carnicle. It was barely caged, but could not break out. Pacts had been made. "You, poxy worm!" bellowed Carnicle. "Do you come to steal my kill? The bloodshed here is mine. The skulls I take belong to the throne of Khorne." The warp serpent's sinuous body unraveled, until its enormous head looked down at Carnicle. "Stay your hands, six-fingered one," said the serpent, its forked tongue flickering between its lips. Two of its eyes focused on Carnicle, the other two absorbing the battle around him. "I have no designs on your petty pile of bodies. I bring word." "Word? What uses talk when there are worm hearts to be stopped?" "From her." "From Legionstrasse?" "From Legionstrasse." Carnicle felt the cold, bloodless bindings around him, invisible but impossible to ignore. They surrounded his soul. They were the work of cowards, of sorcerers, and they wrapped around him and forced him to do their will. He could not forget them when the blood was flowing and the skulls were falling. But now, when her name was invoked... "What is her bidding?" growled Carnicle. "To Cray," said the warp serpent. "The city lost to Opus's history." "Abandon this fight?" replied Carnicle. "What is it, Cray, that is equal to bloodshed of this battle?" "She cares not for blood," said the warp serpent. "But I have no doubt there will be a great deal of death, and she demands it, Six-Finger." "What has she demanded of you?" "To serve as her messenger, for I am the swiftest creature on Opus, to gather a force of champions at Cray. She seeks a victory there that will decide Opus's fate." "Its fate is decided," said Carnicle. "We will drown in blood. I shall reap an ocean of it, and drown 1,000,000 captives there in honor of Khorne." "Your words," said the serpent dryly, "mean less than these worthless souls you so gleefully kill. You will obey. You have no more choice than I. I will see you at Cray, Six-Finger." The warp serpent slid off into the sky, rippling through the columns of smoke rising from the battlefield. Karnakal looked down at the ruined bodies around him. His armor was starting to sear, lines of pain forming along his arms and legs to mirror the seams of molten metal that always ran down his armor's plates. He drove his chain blade into a moaning guardsman who was trying to gather his entrails back to his abdomen. The blade sawed through his chest, and the recognition of his death caused his implants to dull the growing pain just a little. "There had better be death," said Karnakal's six finger. "There had better be blood." "You lost control of one of your own." It was an accusation. The Thunderhawk pitched slightly as it made a course change, heading back to the mountain range. "Do not pretend that no space marine has ever left the fold, Lysander," said Lady Sincella. "How many of our targets have been renegade space marines?" "But that is what happened," said Lysander. "You lost an agent. Legendstrasse has gone rogue." Lady Sincella raised an eyebrow. "That is one way of putting it." "Captain," said Golgothian from the cockpit, "Chekhapov is signaling us." "Chekhapov?" Lysander did not try to hide his annoyance. "What the hell does he want from us?" "Operation Starfall is reporting major troop movements towards Cray." "Cray is abandoned," said Lysander. "The intelligence briefing stated no one has lived there for 100 years." "It was abandoned overnight," said Golgothian. "Most of the city is intact. It's got a spaceport. Though it might be..." "She's there," interjected Lady Sincella. Our operation here was to flush her out in the open, to force her to flee Opus, and then strike at her when she made an escape. The spaceport in an abandoned city is too obvious a choice for her, but she is desperate. We almost killed her once, and she is afraid. That is where we will find her, Captain Lysander." "How many men have died to drive this rogue assassin out of cover?" said Lysander. "Too many to let them die in vain," said Lady Sincella. "Our combined force is enough to take her out. And our combined force will do just that. This absolves the Assassinorum of nothing, Sincella, but we will fight alongside you, for as long as it takes to kill her." "Good. We must make speed to Cree. Legendstrasse will be desperate, and she will have a plan in place. There will be allies with her, and they will grow in number with every hour." The Thunderhawk pitched again as Gorgithian turned it into its new heading. The coast hurtled below them, lashing with the white-capped waves of a coming storm. "It will be rough flying," said Gorgithian. "Not as rough as the landing," said Lysander. "Sincella, if we are to kill Legendstrasse, we must know how. No more secrets. Which temple trained her? What can be done?" "That is a complicated question," said Sincella, and Lysander could not read from her expression what she meant. "I believe the telling of one of the assassin's most closely held secrets must be now allowed. Let me explain to you what Legendstrasse is." When Chekhapov reached the command deck, the medical servitor was trundling behind him. Its fingers were divided into several dexterous manipulators, each as fine as a centipede's leg, which were working on knitting the broken bone of his arm closed. A skin of medical gel covered the open incision. The muscle visible as the white bone was carefully rebuilt layer by layer. The intravenous lines hooked Chekhapov's veins to the bottles and pumps set in the servitor's torso. His greatcoat hung off his shoulder, and he put on his officer's cap as he approached the comms helm. The naval intelligence officer manning the helm saluted Chekhapov. Chekhapov could not return the salute, and the officer looked uncertain for a moment. "You said the code had been received." "Yes, Commander," said the officer. Her eyes flicked to his damaged arm, then back to his face. "Encryption vermilion, marked priority." She handed Chekhapov the data slate on which the message had been transcribed. "Cray?" he said. "Bloody Cray? There's nothing there. I have thousands of men dying on Starfall, and right now I'm to divert them to defend a pile of stones? Sir, Chekhapov didn't notice the officer had spoken. "Do you see?" he yelled, waving the data slate in his air. "It's not enough that I am defied to my face, on my very ship. The lords above us want my soldiers to dance and die to their tune. Most of the officers on the command deck kept their heads bowed, eyes fixed on the pick screens or stacks of reports in front of them. "But that is all we do," said Chikopov. "Someone else plays and we dance." He swept aside an armful of papers from the conference table, revealing the heavily annotated map of Operation Starfall's front. Reports of battles and casualties were coming in from all points along the line. The enemy was fighting here for its own sake, not to capture ground or defend a position, but to bring the Imperial Army to battle and to force it to fight for survival, when it could be helping bulldoze the resistance at Gazelle and Rukaba. "Dispatch the 19th Angol siege breakers, Colonel Mesk. Disengage and redeploy to Cray. Full motorized for speed. Take vehicles and armor from other regiments if need be." He looked at the comms officer. "Tell Mesk he's to let my right flank collapse and bring the whole line down, because that is how the dance goes." "Commander," said the officer, and her fingers tapped on the console as she transmitted the orders in rapid war code. Chekhov pushed the medical servitor away as it rolled after him. He pulled its delicate fingers away from his arm. The medical gel came away with this, and he flexed his fingers, teeth gritted, as he let the blood flow. Cray was a good choice for an escape. It was abandoned. Nobody officially lived there, and those that did so unofficially numbered no more than a few hundred outcasts and scavengers, picking over the well-plundered ruins left by Cray's evacuation. Much of the city had fallen to ruin, but the forest had left the great expanse of the city's spaceport mostly intact. The spaceport was inlaid from the rest of the city, a series of great rock-creek circles, punctuated by control towers, maintenance hangars, and refueling stations. All automated functions had long ceased, but it could still be used to launch or land a spacecraft, albeit one which needed a more competent crew than the average. All one needed was a spaceship. 50 minutes after Chekapov had given his order, contact with the raging sky was lost. Legendstrasse was a creature who planned ahead, not just for one eventuality, but for many. So the groundwork was laid for several potential plans that deal with all the likely turns of fate. With every move, several redundant plots were left unfinished, their preparations unused. They were not wasted. Their existence had helped make a success a certainty. They had played their part. The King of Crows had been adapted from Opus's folklore, as had several other useful legends and customs. Masquerading as the King of Crows had turned out to be the most expeditious method of escaping Azale, and it had got Legendstrasse all the way to the northern part of the continent, where preparations had been made to depart Opus quickly and invisibly. Instead, Legendstrasse had activated a fallback plan. It was almost as good as the previous options, the only drawback being it could not be accomplished entirely beyond the notice of the Imperial forces that had come to Opus to find Legendstrasse. The raging sky had been compromised some decades before Inquisitor Ketrips had begun the crusade that led him to Opus. It was an armored troop carrier, one of several in the sector battle fleet had. Due to the need to transport men and material quickly to an embattled planet such as Opus, it would certainly be used by Imperial forces who believed that they were doing the bidding of the Emperor, who had been reborn in the form of an infant girl. This cult had been created by Legendstrasse, by a sect of useful psychers native to Opus, and she had gathered them to help her in her exile. Visions were transmitted into the minds of the trainee crewmen who had placed on the raging sky to let their cult grow and recruit further, always with frequent visions sent by Legendstrasse to ensure they empathize with the need for secrecy and loyalty above all else. On the other ships, the cult, which was known by various names, including the Children of the Ladder God and the Eternal Star, was purged by the commissars of the sector fleet. On others, the cult died away, its members poached by other cults, which had developed among the battle fleet's crews independent of Legendstrasse's influence. But Legendstrasse knew that on some ships it would survive, and on the raging sky it did. To Legendstrasse it was a message sent to the arcane channels to the Psychers now fighting alongside the forces opposing Operation Starfall. To the brothers and sisters of the 13 Pillars, as the cult named itself in the raging sky, it was the apocalypse. They had waited for years for the day to come when the voice of the infant goddess Emperor spoke to them more directly than ever before, and told them to undertake their sacred mission. They had known since the cult's foundation that their task would see them taking over the ship and landing it in the spaceport at Cray, there to witness the apotheosis of the goddess emperor as she arose and took her place on the throne of mankind. The master of the watch, a mere initiate of the cult, but the one who held the highest shipboard rank, was given the task of beginning the great work. He drew his las pistol on the bridge and shot the ship's captain in the back of the head. His second target was the ship's commissar, who he shot several times in the chest, fatally, before the security battalion troops on the bridge finally reacted and martyred the master of the watch in a hail of shotgun blasts. This was the catalyst for the rest of the great work. The mess was sealed off, with 250 crew inside, and the whole deck was decompressed to hard vacuum. The most difficult task was to take the engines, where the tough engine gangs had resisted infiltration by the cult. The devotees of the 13 Pillars broke open the armory, shot down the gangers who tried to rush them, and offered the rest the option of serving the cult or dying. The bridge held out for an hour before the las cutters hauled up from the engine decks were used to cut through the ceiling. The short and bloody gun battle left twice as many cultists as officers dead, but it did not matter how many were made martyrs, as long as the great work was completed. The goddess emperor smiled on them, as the 13 Pillars, named after the commandments that Legendstrauss's psyker implanted in them, took over the controls of the raging sky, and aimed it towards the cloudy surface of Opus.